Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me on Hey Legal Insights. How are you?
I'm well, thanks very much for having me.
Well, absolute pleasure. I'm delighted that you have found the time to join us. So, on the Hey Legal Insights series, we're basically trying to get an idea of the reality of different types of roles in the profession. And you have been a trainee during the time of COVID, and you have now recently qualified. So congratulations on that. So I
Thank
wonder
you.
if you could just discuss that's been like for you, what work's been like, what your day-to-day routine is like, the work that you've done, all of the above. How's it been?
Thanks very much, and for a very nice general question that I can just ramble at and response. Yeah, it's been an interesting period. So I did my first seat with the firm in personal injury. I worked for Thornton's Law. We're a full service law firm. So I did the first seat in personal injury. That was entirely normal in the Edinburgh office. And then I went into residential property, and very shortly after that, we became a virtual law firm and everybody started working from home. And then it was a bit of a strange period as everybody's lived through. We thought it might have been, a couple of months at most, but still ongoing. And then I went into commercial litigation, where I started virtually. I met my boss virtually, and she supervised me virtually for the entire 6 months. And I met her for the first time quite recently in person.
Right.
That was a kind of strange experience, and I did my first few court appearances virtually or by conference call. I did an evidential hearing by WebEx, and then I did a second seat in commercial litigation, but working for a different partner that does slightly different work. And then by that time, we were allowed to go into the office towards the end a couple of times a week. My firm were able to prioritise trainees to come in so that we could get some FaceTime with supervisors, and that was really helpful from a well-being point of view. Being able to connect with colleagues, how was your weekend, and all that stuff that we haven't had for a couple of years almost. And then I qualified into the dispute resolution team, so I worked for the same partner that I worked for when I did my final seat, and I do dispute resolution, which is the kind of new way of saying commercial litigation. I do a bit of construction disputes and professional negligence and defamation and all the kind of stuff that falls within commercial litigation. And I also do a bit of criminal defence as well, which I really enjoy. So it's been a very interesting period. I've really enjoyed the work. I started this traineeship. I started this period being somebody who was very pro homework. And I think, I've had my fill now, and I'm probably a bit more towards office work, or certainly a hybrid. Now my setup is I generally go into the office 2 days a week, either Glasgow or sometimes I go up to Dundee to be with the team. And then the rest of my diary is dictated by court. So if I have to be in court, I will usually drive there if it's a criminal matter, or I will dial in a t-shirt like this if it's just by phone call or whatever. But yeah, it's been an interesting period.
Yeah, I'm sure it has. How did you feel about starting to make your first court appearances? Would that be from home then that you did that?
Yes. It was an interesting way to experience conference calls for one of the first times as well, because I guess it wasn't something that I'd really experienced much of prior, and then all of a sudden I was dialing in and trying to make submissions to a sheriff and advocate in an environment that was just completely alien to what I'd been taught at university, which was stand, look at the sheriff, make sure the sheriff's following you, pause, look at the sheriff's body language. You can tell if he or she's not with you. Then you know when to drop certain things. None of that applies, and ultimately grateful to sheriffs who can tell that you're a trainee and that you're just experiencing this, and will tend to take the lead a wee bit more. And I mean, they generally do that in the conference calls anyway. So it was an interesting experience. I was able to dial in as an additional participant just before I got my restricted practicing certificate. So I was able to hear colleagues, which kind of mimicked going to see colleagues in court, but albeit it wasn't the same. And then by the time I did my first kind of evidential hearing, I'd done loads of procedural stuff, and I was au fait with, everybody's au fait with sharing screens and all that stuff now. So by that time, it was more straightforward, but not without hitches. It relies upon people having good internet access, having access to technology, being able to work the technology, and particularly if you've got party litigants involved or people that might not have access to these things, it can't be, it's not without its difficulty, but for the most part, it's worked quite well.
And what about when you've had the chance then to go in to make physical court appearances? What's that been like?
Yeah, infinitely preferable from my point of view. Infinitely a better experience for the client, particularly if it's not a purely procedural matter and it's something where there's a decision to be made and there's maybe evidence to be looked at. I prefer going to court. For me personally, the first time I did it, I remember remembering, oh yeah, you need to have a court gown, because obviously I'd never have to think about that. The last one I had was, can I try one on in the diploma? So I had to go and arrange to borrow a colleague's and go along to, I can't remember which sheriff court it might have been, Dundee or Forfar, and it was a criminal matter I was appearing in. And it was the first time that I had experienced the agent's room and the camaraderie in there and speaking to other solicitors before you go in. And that was, I remember noting, that's something I've definitely missed out on in my traineeship, just because, well, a lot of the criminal lawyers have been in those courts the entire time, but I hadn't had that experience. So that was interesting. And now that's something that I really look forward to, seeing clients in person, taking instructions in person in real time, speaking to the sheriff and all of those non-verbal cues. It's infinitely preferable as a lawyer. Certainly as somebody who was interested in court work, I want to be in the court where possible.
No, I mean, I think there's been a lot of sympathy for people who, like yourself, who've had to go through the traineeship process without having the human connection with other members of the profession, because you do learn so much. You sit, waiting for your case to call, seeing others appear, reading the room, seeing the irritation, no doubt, of the sheriff about certain things, and also just asking colleagues. People are obviously very collegiate in their approach, give you a help. And the idea of actually being isolated at home, trying to navigate something without maybe someone to just have a quick word with is pretty terrifying, to be honest. Now, you're a man who does public speaking, and we'll maybe come into that later on. But how did you feel nervous about making first court appearances?
Yes, I mean, there's always going to be an element of nerves, particularly where it's a criminal matter and somebody's. It wasn't particularly serious, but you're wary of the potential outcomes, and you hear all these kind of horror stories of getting your gown caught on the way in and tripping over or something like that happening and just being a complete disaster. So I would be lying if I said I wasn't nervous, but the fact that I had done so much work procedurally prior to that, and I had the chance to be in front of, I think the sheriff that I had appeared in front of, I'd technically been in front of him a few times, and I could tell he kind of recognised my name and stuff. That was helpful, and sheriffs are generally very helpful to new lawyers. Obviously, they recognise that it's a new face, and they're generally, in my experience, okay with that. And other lawyers within the court are always very encouraging. If you have to, ask, what's the procedure here or whatever, they're generally helpful. So it was a great experience, and as any court lawyer or anybody who's interested in this area of work will tell you, it's an adrenaline rush, and there's nothing quite like it, particularly if you get the result that you asked for. It's great, and that's why I love it. So for me, there's nothing quite like the courtroom.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So tell me, what has been the most interesting work or the most interesting cases that you've been involved in thus far?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I think one of the best things about being in litigation is that it feels like you're cheating a wee bit. All of my colleagues who specialise in particular areas of law, I feel like I get to sample so many different areas of law, because when they come to court, essentially you'll need a litigator. And obviously there are specialised forms of litigation, family law, employment law, etc. But in civil litigation, you get to sample a load of different areas. I particularly enjoy the criminal defence stuff. I particularly enjoy construction disputes, but I've also been involved in matters concerning public law, involving public authorities. I've been involved in defamation cases, and I get consulted by charities as well. I'm a charity director, so that's something that I'm really interested in. So it's difficult to pick. So I'm just going to sit on the fence. I just enjoy the variety, to be honest.
Yeah. No, it's brilliant. I think getting the chance to do loads of different types of work really keeps it fresh, especially at the early part of your career as well. You know, just to get a chance rather than early on just going down one particular route. So sounds brilliant. So that maybe leads us on to the next question is, you know, your life in the law generally. So if you're happy to tell our viewers about it, you know, can you tell us about your choosing law, why you wanted to do that, and your route into the profession, please?
Sure. I guess I'm probably somewhat unique in that I had experienced what it was like to be at the centre of complex or relatively complex legal proceedings from a very early age. The family that I was born into were facing difficulty at a point in my childhood due to addiction and mental health issues. And that resulted in the local authority initiating care proceedings to put me under a supervision order and take me into the care of the state, effectively. So I remember being 5 or 6 years old and being in Glasgow Sheriff Court and being in a back room where, you know, drawing pictures with my social worker whilst adults in another room decided what my kind of fate would be and who I would be able to see and what I would be able to do. And although I was so young at the time, I do remember a feeling of powerlessness, voicelessness, lack of agency in that situation. And of course, later in life, I've reflected, and that's probably where the seed was planted, that I wanted to go into those same courts and advocate for other people. So that's probably the simple answer of where that initially came from. I formed a number of positive relationships after leaving high school with very little qualifications. And I was able to get into the University of Strathclyde via kind of a widening access programme, initially part-time. I graduated from there 4 years later. Then I went on to University of Glasgow, where I really enjoyed my time there as well, and then done my traineeship at Thornton's. And by that time, I had worked in various different areas. Like I've worked in politics. I have worked for a couple of law firms. I've also worked in insurance claims. So I've got a kind of a wide range of experience, which I think helps. So if there are people, you know, watching this who, you know, you may be thinking about law as a second career, or you may be the first person in your family like me to think about going to university, I would definitely encourage you. And I think actually having that additional experience of different industries has made me a better lawyer. And ultimately, as a litigator, my early experiences just remind me all the time that whilst litigation can be about contract, or it can be about negligence or missives or whatever the dispute is over, ultimately litigation is about people and how their relationships break down. And our job as litigators is to try to come to some kind of resolution, whether that's via a court decision or not, to allow those people to move on. And I always, as somebody who's been at the centre of court proceedings, I always try to keep that in my mind.
Mm. Oh, that's fantastic. And how have you felt about joining the profession? What's it been like for you?
It's a huge privilege. Like, I love what I do. It's amazing to be a lawyer, and I think that it's a brilliant profession to be part of. think the vast majority of people that I come across are supportive and collegiate. And, I just had a really positive conversation with a counterpart on the other side of a litigation just before we started recording this interview. There are people within my firm who have taught me that litigation doesn't necessarily always have to be nasty and confrontational. There's obviously an element of confrontational when it comes to arguing with someone, right? There's always going to be an element of that, but you don't necessarily have to treat your counterpart with aggression. And that's the way I always try and think about it, is my job is one of persuasion. An advocate persuades people, and I try to persuade the person on the other side that my client's position is stronger than theirs. And if I can't do that, and I can't do that collegiately, then I'll try to persuade the court that our position is stronger. And I think you can do that without necessarily being overly aggressive towards one another. And particularly during the pandemic, where I'm conscious that people are sitting at home, as you say, you don't have somebody to sit next to and you can say, I can't believe the email I just got, So I always try to be conscious of that in my correspondence. And one thing I would say is it's 1,000 times better to pick up the phone if you feel that you're not reading each other well. And in my experience, 9 times out of 10, you'll probably resolve whatever you thought was there, and it probably actually wasn't an issue in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're all familiar with the concept of keyboard warriors and different, guises, but, speaking to people, invariably, you see the human, on the other side of everything. You realise your difficulties are largely the same. And I think the key thing, Ryan, as well, is that obviously you're in this for the long game. You treat everyone with respect ultimately, and these things tend to work out. There's no point in gaining opponents or enemies through a particular case.
I 100% agree with you, and it was something that was drummed into us on the diploma and on the law degree at Glasgow University and Strathclyde, respectively, and by my colleagues. It's a very small profession, and you will come across, particularly if you're a litigator, you'll come across the same people quite often, and it's just much better to have a good working relationship with somebody. And in fact, it's arguably in your respective client's favour that you have that good working relationship, because it saves time and it saves unnecessary emails back and forward, maybe unnecessary court process even, arguably, if you can pick up the phone and say, what can we agree on? What do we disagree on? And is there a route to meet in the middle or somewhere thereabouts for the stuff that we disagree on? Or if not, well, let's narrow the issues that we disagree on, and then we can go to court on that. And if that's in everybody's interest. So I definitely try to take that approach.
Yeah. And I think it'll be interesting going forward, as obviously we're much more aware of matters like, trauma-informed practice now, and thinking about how, whether it's accused persons or persons within the court system, what they experience within it, or what their experiences in life have been. Equally in terms of how lawyers interact with each other and, the dynamic around that. Maybe that will all simply be revised as we go forward. Maybe I'm just an optimist thinking that we'll take away. It is an adversarial system, of course it is. Yeah. But, treating each other with, respect and never getting personal around things, maybe they'll look back and say that was that those practices are maybe something that should be outmoded, really, or left to the past.
Yes, it's definitely. I'm glad you mentioned the trauma-informed stuff, the work that's been led out by Smithy and Melissa Rutherford and Tony Bowen and others. I'm sorry if I haven't mentioned them. Is great and looks at accused primarily and the sort of the reasons which might explain certain behaviours, which sometimes has been overlooked in the criminal justice system. I think that's definitely something that's worth exploring and exploring more widely, not just in terms of the sentences that we impose upon people who are deeply traumatised and who should be looked at through a medical lens. I think that we should also, look at vicarious trauma for lawyers, particularly criminal lawyers and family lawyers who read some traumatic stuff, who view traumatic pieces of evidence and have to carry that stuff around with them. It's a good opportunity to plug Lawcare, who are a charity that I am on the board of, and they provide support, mental health and wellbeing support to legal professionals across the UK. And they just released a report called Life in the Law, which looks at the experiences of over 1,700 lawyers, and some of the findings in that are definitely worth looking at. Some of it's quite shocking. I would encourage people to go and have a look at that. But I think the consciousness around mental health, around trauma, around how our work impacts us and impacts the other people who use the system in which we're operating, I think the increased awareness in that is a good thing, and it needs to come with action, and it seems to be that there is progress being made there. So hopefully that will continue.
Yeah, there's definitely progress being made, and those that you mentioned have done phenomenal work, and you're obviously involved in that yourself. I mean, this might be a bit of a big question for you at this stage in your career, but do you have any thoughts around reform? You know, you're in the profession now, you've seen how some of it operates. Have you ever thought to yourself, I can't believe that this is done this way? Or
that is a big question. I definitely agree that short-term prison sentences, for example, are effectively pointless. I think that our criminal justice system in particular should be aimed at rehabilitation and the idea of smart justice, and how do we get people that are better rounded citizens at the end of it, rather than focusing predominantly on punishment. So that's an area that I definitely would like to see reformed. I would like to see justice become more accessible. I think that there are clear issues around legal aid. Others are much more well versed on this than I am, but Glasgow Bar Association, which I'm a member of, have recently taken action as a result of this, and there's a number of prominent lawyers within the profession who are making pleas to the government to sort the situation with legal aid. And we've got a new Justice Secretary, and I hope that he will take action. I know that it's being looked at, so hopefully that results in reform soon. I'm concerned about, following on from that, just generally, I went through basically my entire law school experience being told by various people that a career in criminal defence was either not possible or not advisable because it would be poorly paid, it would be very stressful, and that it's underfunded generally. And I've heard that from so many different sources that it seems to be a general impression. I was lucky that in my firm I was able to do a bit of that work, but it's not predominantly what I do. And I think that there's a real argument about equality of arms in terms of the investment that's made into prosecution and the Crown Service, and well deservedly so. But how is that going to be mirrored on the other side of the profession? And whether you are working for a legal aid firm or whether you even do criminal law or not, I think anybody with any interest in access to justice or human rights should be concerned about that. So that's an area that I'd also like to see being reformed.
Well, Ryan, you've got many years ahead of you in your career, so I look forward to you resolving these issues as we go forward. But no, brilliant. So not only in amongst all of the brilliant achievements that you've outlined thus far, you've also managed somehow to fit in a media career, public speaking duties, or appearances. So how did all of that come about, and do you want to tell us more about it?
Yes, I don't know if I would frame it as grandly as you have. Thanks very much. Well, that sounds quite. It sounds quite cool to say I've got a media career. The media stuff started because I reached out to people who worked at BBC Scotland, specifically on a programme called BBC The Social. And I was intending to have a bit of a rant about how the BBC, in my view at that time, wasn't particularly representative of people who came from communities like mine. I grew up in one of the poorest areas in the UK. I think consistently it was considered that for much of my time when I was growing up there. I'm from the Easterhouse. I've grew up in Easterhouse, Brigton or Bridgeton and Parkhead. So that's kind of the areas that I grew up in. And I didn't see that these areas were necessarily represented well. But the Miles Boner, who's the producer there that I was put in touch with, was very welcoming. And then he just brought me in and said, look, well, what ideas have you got? And then I eventually done a couple of videos with them. And then round about the same time, BBC Scotland new channel was starting, and I had been working in politics at the time, so I was invited on a couple of times to just do some of the early iterations of BBC 7 Days, and that kind of stuff just continued. And it's just one of those where if you take an opportunity, usually it leads to other opportunities. So it was just basically luck and perseverance, which is the story of most of my achievements, to be honest. And on the public speaking stuff, it's kind of a similar. There was an organisation called Tigers, who are a training provider who are very focused on relationship-based practice and helping young people get into the workforce and taking alternative routes and getting into apprenticeships and all of that stuff. And they were interested in what I was saying about relationships. And they invited me along to speak at a conference. It's the first time I'd ever been asked to do anything like that, to be honest. And they were very supportive, and I went along and done it. And then some people that were at it invited me to a different one, and it kind of snowballed from there. Again, just an opportunity that led to more. So if there's any advice that comes out of that for other people, I would say yes to things that take your comfort zone, because they can lead to other things. So yeah, immensely grateful for that. I do a little bit of stuff in the media, and sometimes get invited along to do cool things like this, or get invited along to speak to education establishments or training providers or whatever, and normally talking about how a series of positive relationships helped me get from a particular position and probably predicted outcome in life to one where I'm pursuing my dream career. And it's really powerful it feels like a real privilege to be able to do that in front of people. And recently I've been doing that over Zoom, which is not the same, but it was an alternative during the whole pandemic.
Yeah. Well, you said in amongst that, you said that it was a combination of luck and perseverance, but you make your own luck, Ryan, clearly, and you've done that, brilliantly. And the advice you gave, there's a lot of students and people considering legal careers and out there looking for advice. I mean, would your advice be to people to reach out to try to do different things?
Yes, 100%. I recently read the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. So I've kind of got that idea in my head. Somebody recommended it to me after having heard me speaking at something, and I read it. And if you haven't read it, it's definitely worth reading. But it basically debunks the idea that some people are just born geniuses, or some people are just born like messy. It basically establishes how various successful people from other different successful areas were probably quite inherently talented, but because they showed that at an early age, they were encouraged and provided opportunities, and because they had a good work ethic, they made the most of those opportunities, and they got the kind of a fabled 10,000 hours of practice quite early, and therefore were seen as kind of a prodigy or whatever. And it talks about that in sports, and it talks about that, and I think it talks about Bill Gates and other people like that. So that's an interesting one to keep in mind, because I think that's applicable to so many people that are successful. You have to be a wee bit, sorry, my mic just tipped over. You have to be a wee bit lucky. You have to be given opportunities, and you have to make the most of the opportunities that you're given. So that's definitely what I done. You know, a series of relationships, as I've said, provided me with a platform to get into university. When I got into university, I recognised that this was a kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity, and without turning it into a kind of X Factor story and talking about a journey and all of that, you know, I met a lecturer there. Shout out to Chris McCuaig, and I became, you know, obsessed with the idea of getting a first, and I asked him, how can I get a first? How can I get a first? And he gave me some really good advice, and I just took all that on board. I took on board all my feedback, and I just basically structured my life into a spreadsheet and worked, and eventually, you know, I managed it, and it was a great day, and it felt great to get to that achievement. But it's not because I have some kind of inherent intelligence for the law, because I left school with 0 hires, and I don't have any inherent ability to study either. I just made the most of that opportunity and took advice and worked hard, and that's the advice I would give to law students. And in terms of reaching out, I think relationships are very important, and learning from other people. And my experience is the vast majority of people within this profession will want to help other people who are coming up. That's certainly my experience.
Yeah, brilliant answer. Inspirational.
That was a bit of a journey from Malcolm Gladwell to Chris McCuaig.
No, that's fair. I'm sure they're often bracketed together. I'm sure Chris McCuaig will be delighted about that, as will Malcolm Gladwell. And we'll need to ask Chris McCuaig about what his tips were about getting the first, because I'm sure many people will be interested in relation to that. But no, brilliant stuff. So, you know, we've been through a number of dazzling achievements here, but you know, what lies ahead? What do you see on the horizon now for? Was that a Thornton's branded water bottle there?
I was trying not to say that as if it was blatant.
So what lies ahead for you next?
Well, I've just qualified as a lawyer, so I'm quite busy. I'm really enjoying just building my experience in the sheriff courts and working with counsel and leading my own cases, working with partners and other people at the firm, and just learning as much as I can. I'm really enjoying that. In the next couple of weeks, I intend on launching a wee project on YouTube myself, albeit it will be no rival to the content that's on Here We Go. It will have no chance of ever coming close to the quality here. But there was a bit of I'm serious, but there's a bit of chat on social media recently about accessibility for careers advice, or of careers advice for law students, and people having to pay for that stuff. And I remember the financial barriers that I faced just being a law student. The cost of textbooks, the cost of networking events, and all of that stuff. So I just thought I'll put up a couple of videos just sharing my reflections on the stuff that helped me get traineeships. I got a traineeship at my number one choice firm, and how I managed to get a first, for example. And if people find that stuff helpful, then it's worth doing. So I've recorded one of those that needs to be edited, and then if people find the first one helpful, I'll do a couple more. So that's the main thing that's happening in the next couple of weeks.
Well, that sounds brilliant. I'm sure they will find them very helpful. As you know, we're on hand if you need assistance with anything at all. You just we will assist you in every way we can. So Ryan, well, I think all that leaves me to do is thank you so much for your time. I mean, it's been absolutely brilliant to hear from you. I've followed your social feeds, you know, Twitter, essentially, and seen, I suppose, part of your, you know, journey. And I've thought it's been absolutely brilliant. I've obviously seen you now and again on TV and things like that. So it's been really brilliant just to hear more of the detail of that. I think your story will be inspiring to many, and I'm sure that tremendous. I mean, this almost sounds too gushy. I'm being too nice to you here, but
thanks very much. That's great. I'm enjoying this ending.
But it's true, because I think, well, so much lies ahead. I mean, you've packed in so much already in terms of achievement, you know, and it really is phenomenal. You're just getting your career in the law started now, and I'm sure over the time that lies ahead, great things will happen. So all the very best of luck with that, you know.
Thanks very much. And thanks for having me. It's been an enjoyable experience.
Great. Well, listen, Ryan, all the best. We will hopefully speak to you very soon, and look forward to seeing your YouTube channel in due course. Take care.
Thank you. Let's see if we can get 10 views.
Oh, I'm sure you'll do more than that. Cheers now.
Thank you.